Cool. So thanks for joining us. Maybe we could start by just sort of broad overview. I know we have a lot of professionals in the audience, but I want to just start by kind of zooming out. What is an NFT and why are they valuable? There's been so much hype about them. I think there's a lot of confusion about what they actually are. Maybe Kayvon, we could start with you, and anyone else who wants to take a crack can go too.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's many ways to color NFTs, and that's why perhaps there's confusion. And I think honestly, as people start to interact with them concretely, they'll actually appreciate them and all the nuances. But at a high level, I view them as really like digital objects that can be owned. And when you can own a digital object, you get the whole array of features that come from ownership. So the ability to sell it, the ability to make a profit, the ability for it to hold value, the ability to kind of show it off and demonstrate the history of ownership, the ability to encode, because it's digital, the ability to encode logic around how it or what it can do in a programming environment. And so the reason I think there is hype is we are at the beginning of understanding what this new digital object is going to do. And people are now allowed to kind of use their imagination to run wild and imagine all the new scenarios that are going to take place on the internet with these new digital objects, because owning them has never been possible. And that's really how I think about it.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. Like, the internet from the beginning was enabling exchange with sort of transient ideas, things that couldn't be monetized and just existed, the free exchange of information. Is that what's new about NFTs, and that's why there's kind of this mania around them, the idea that we can monetize basically anything by attaching it to a token? And what kind of possibilities does that open up?
I think that the mania stems from the fact that there's so many ways that this is revolutionary, because it's not just monetization, in my opinion. It's really a fundamental re-architecture of the internet. And that might sound like hyperbole, but if we look back in 10 years, I think we'll be astounded by the extent to which NFTs rewired how all content on the internet worked, because ownership is a fundamental kind of tenet of what I think we want from things that we create, right? And when we go to the internet and we publish something, we are creating that, and having encoding ownership and property rights into it is going to really unleash a new economy and new rules to an economy and how the internet has worked. And previously, we've relied on ad models, and everything has had an impermanence and a duplicative nature where things could just be virally copied. Now there's an ability for something to have scarcity, to have provenance, to have true property rights encoded into the file. And that is revolutionary. Now, will this take 10 years to truly manifest and to truly kind of break into like mainstream culture so that every day when you're on the internet, you're using an NFT and you're not even thinking about it? Yes. It's a long journey, but I think it's one of those like moments where the box has been opened, the imaginations have run wild, and you can't put those ideas back into the box. We're kind of going to be with this for a while, and I think you're going to watch it go up and down in terms of how much hype and speculation and energy there is. But long term, I think you are talking about a fundamental breakthrough in how the internet is structured. And people, and even if you speak to the artists who are really putting this to work, they're never going to not want this tool at their disposal. The idea of them going to the internet and just putting something on the internet with no property rights encoded into it won't make sense. It'll feel really silly not to do that. Why would you, like, perhaps you'll actually be subversive by not doing it in the future, right? As an act of protest of saying this is free, right? But on the whole, the vast majority of content and creation will get encoded with these property rights. And I do think it's going to be a fundamental property of the new internet.
Yeah, I remember when we spoke about this a couple of months ago, you were saying that, NFTs kind of portend a future where everything is going to be tokenized. Adam, you were kind of nodding there. What does this mean from an artist perspective? And what are you kind of looking for, in terms of artists who are looking to partner with an NFT platform, or what makes that exciting for artists?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple things in there, right? I think one is the first is the tokenization piece that you mentioned, and I think that's going to have huge implications long term, right? Whether that is a universe creator in the sort of filmmaker space, right? Like a James Cameron, J.J. Abrams, a Jon Favreau, Zack Snyder, folks like that who have such rabid fan bases, right? And could tokenize their fan base and offer any sort of myriad of opportunities or special sort of access or perks, pieces of art, anything sort of like that, right? If you look at it in the sports space, think about teams that could tokenize their fandom, and the ability to offer certain special sort of, again, pieces of art, access, relationships with players, whatnot, based on those tokens. And so I think for us, tokenization is going to be key as you look, sort of more down the line, just given sort of how many of these folks have such rabid sort of fan bases. I think to your other sort of question around, how are talent and clients and whatnot looking at NFTs right now? I think there's two ways to look at it, right? There's the immediate sort of short term, and folks who want to play in the space, and you look at some of the success that people like Blau have had, and drops that the Weekend have done, or you look at what Gronk did as sort of the first athlete to go and drop such a successful sort of set of NFTs, and that's sort of more in the short term. And then again, you look at sort of more of, like, I would say, the universe creators who are thinking about this long term and really looking at what sort of things can they do to really sort of embrace what their audiences and their fans are looking for, and allow them to produce sort of art in new medium for those folks.
Max, how does a traditional auction house like Sotheby's slot into this whole ecosystem? Because so much of it feels so new and internet native. Where's your role coming into this whole world?
It's a great question. And, my role was pretty much non-existent prior to January 2021, when I first got involved, I would say. I'd been monitoring it as a marketplace kind of over the pandemic. I'd been influenced or introduced to CryptoPunks with, honestly, skepticism at the time. There was a moment for me where, I sell contemporary or, physical objects, and I try to sell the feeling that one has, that interaction that one has with an object, that I wasn't able to connect with, where I wasn't, I hadn't opened up my mind to connecting with from in a digital medium exclusively. In the contemporary art world, there are some, massive artists like Namjoon Pike or Bill Viola, kind of pioneers of the digital art movement that were working in the 70s. We do occasionally sell these works at Sotheby's or, in the general marketplace, but it is a rather niche collecting category. And I think that's in part because of the way that technology has transformed so incredibly quickly since they created it in the 70s. And so their creation in the 70s now looks rather obsolete. The way that it was created needs to constantly be upgraded to preserve. Now, NFTs, and also, of course, they're bound by the traditional, I'd say, interactions between collector and buyer and artist, where NFTs have now really kind of disrupted the transaction, if you will, in a very interesting way, really connecting artist and the community, the audience, like never before, and really giving a platform, for trading and exchanging to happen in a very quick, fast-paced direction. So, when I first saw this, again, I was a little bit skeptical. I was introduced to PAC, and after several conversations, my first conversation actually was PAC introducing or teaching me how to set up my MetaMask wallet. So it was an interesting conversation at the beginning, but I quickly realized that there was a true, artistic genius that PAC brought to the equation or brought to the table, that I made parallels to any sort of conceptual artist that I admired in the past, like Solowit or even Fontana. And And at that point, I started to recognize that, maybe I'd been short-sighted or, closed-minded about what one could view or interact with an NFT as an artistic form, as an artistic medium. And it wasn't me to judge, the next person who had that same experience with an NFT that I had with with a physical artwork. And that breakthrough moment was kind of the start of the pack sale, if you will, and kind of the start of Sotheby's trajectory into the NFT marketplace. What's been interesting to date is that, following the, I think success of the pack sale, what we were able to drill down into is that it's a completely new audience that really is, may not have ever interacted with Sotheby's or the traditional art market previously, but are approaching it in the same kind of vigor and enthusiasm in terms of the collecting style and preference and taste as a traditional collector. It's a new aesthetic, it's a new collector base, it's a new creative, artistic, process, but the fundamentals of collectorship, still exist. And that's what's kind of very interesting to see from Sotheby's perspective.
You mentioned, a connection between sort of the artist and the work. I think it's worth spelling that out because I think so much of the narrative about NFTs has kind of been, Beeple sold a JPEG file for $69 million. There are these kind of splashy numbers, and on their face, it looks, it's easy to be skeptical about this stuff, but I think also there's like this other layer of stuff that's going on. Kayvon, maybe you could speak to some of this too. Are we doing a disservice to the whole NFT narrative to even be focusing on these sorts of splashy auctions, and how much is it really about selling a JPEG?
Well, I have multiple thoughts. One, I really have no objection to the splashy headlines. I'm not a journalist, and I'm not running those publications, but I understand their perspective, which is that's what captures people's attention, and that's what captures people's ability to then say, what the hell's going on, right? What does it mean you sold a JPEG? I'm happy when people ask questions. So that's really where I lie on that front, which is, oh, how can you now sell a JPEG? That's a really interesting question. And if you actually want to now go answer that question, you're going to have to go understand Ethereum. You're going to have to understand wallets. You're going to have to understand cryptocurrency. You're going to have to understand IPFS. And this is what we call the rabbit hole. And whatever flashy headline prompts people to really go and start digging into what is really a new internet, I'm satisfied. I'm not here to like make pot shots at all the different ways in which that's not productive, because ultimately, long term, it's not productive, right? If all you do is read that and say, cool, a JPEG sold for a lot of money, I'm not going to do any other research. I'm not going to understand any way or why that's possible now, right? That isn't productive. But I do think it's prompted a lot of people to pay attention. And what I think is really exciting is that NFTs, and I'll just keep emphasizing this so for the audience, is that NFTs are programmable objects. All of their value, all of their possibility is ahead of us. It's not like we just invented this thing that's static and there's a snapshot in time and like that time is quickly passing. For example, we just released our secondary market today on Foundation. That means that as these NFTs change hands, there's a program running on the blockchain that then goes and affords the original artist a 10% payment in perpetuity. That is programmed into the blockchain. That is really powerful, and that's something that can only truly unfold over decades. So we're talking about Pack. I love his work. It will only continue to accrue value, and it will only continue to create economic value on the internet. And the programmable nature of the NFT will only continue to kind of spread to all the parties that are interacting with these NFTs. And so I think like this is something that's really powerful. It's very long term. It takes a while to understand it, because a lot of the examples of where its power is demonstrated does require time and attention. But no, I don't have an objection to the headlines. It's so long as the people reading those headlines and being shocked by them do go and ask themselves some questions about how this is possible and do some research on what is powering this new economy, because that's the most important thing. Because if no one goes and figures and learns more about this, it'll fizzle out, and we'll have to kind of go back to square one of really teaching people why this is new and powerful.
Yeah, and I might just jump in there just quickly. Completely agree with everything Kayvon said, and these flashy headlines have brought the conversation to a global level, which has been incredibly important. But it is important to recognize that a ceiling has been set, and that in a traditional marketplace, there's steady and healthy growth that continues over time. I do want to see how the market responds to the fact that there's a $69 million result as the ceiling, that the realistic pricing is still incredible, when it's $500,000 to $700,000. That's, an incredible achievement. And I just want to make sure that people understand that just because it didn't break the $70 million benchmark doesn't mean that the marketplace is in effect, in a downward spiral. It really just shows that there's still healthy growth that is necessary, for the future. And that's what happens in any contemporary art auction. You have, steady growth at the primary level where the gallerist takes hold of your pricing, increases it incrementally based on previous success. It's important to create that steady, healthy growth over an elongated period of time for, sustainability in the marketplace.
And I would also piggyback on that is, on Foundation, we have simultaneously high profile auctions taking place that are going for millions of dollars. And artists like Pac or Edward Snowden or People Pleaser, right, that are breaking our $1 million mark. But the same technology is being used by over 15,000 artists on the platform, running the exact same NFT standard, running the exact same auction smart contract to create value for their work. And their work is gaining. And even if it starts at $500, they're being given the same opportunity that Pac and these other artists are. And the playing field is level. And one thing I'd love to highlight is we recently ran an auction for an Ethiopian collective this past weekend. They organically arrived on the platform. The East Africa network has actually started to grow on our platform. And they were able to sell 6 NFTs this weekend for almost 40 Ethereum, which is about, I think they took home around like $50,000. And I mean, that's just enormous. They use the exact same technology. They access the same market, the same global market that any other artist now has access to, as opposed to saying, oh, are you in London? Are you in New York? Are you in LA? No, well, these people were in Ethiopia, right? And they had the exact same experience. That's really powerful. And by the way, the art was incredible. It just never had the chance to find an outlet the way it can now find an outlet, because the playing field is more level.
Yeah. And our next sale at Sotheby's on June 3rd, we made an announcement yesterday. Of course, we'll have some, the superstar headliners, but we will also be incorporating, some of the younger artists that we find very promising in a very curated, tight-knit group. So the price range will vary. We believe that that's, paramount to the future success of this entire marketplace.
Got it.
Agreed. This is not about celebrities. I think if you walk away and all you're doing is focusing on celebrities issuing NFTs, you're completely missing the story.
Right. I just want to ask, because I think we only have time for one more question. The environmental issue, like you're talking about, a lot of people who are just getting into this space kind of, they're coming in fresh. The headlines are good at sort of getting people on board, but I think the first thing that people want to know about is the environmental concern, especially if they're not sort of acquainted with crypto already, because there's so many misconceptions about it. How do you sort of approach that? What's your perspective on it? And do you think that what NFTs are bringing to the table, how are they worth the environmental cost?
Should I be answering this first?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, great. I'm someone who's been, building internet infrastructure for over a decade. And so I think really from my perspective, the what has happened with blockchains is we've created an unprecedented amount of transparency. So if you really think about services like Google, Facebook, Netflix, if you were an engineer on the inside, and I worked at Google for 5 years, you were aware of the data center infrastructure necessary to power these computing resources, right? And the interesting thing, though, is that because of the nature of data centers, where you can position them in strategic locations where they can tap into renewables and you can create really scalable architecture, I do believe that they are a fundamental improvement to our energy infrastructure, right? Because you can move them anywhere in the world. And because we're using the internet, even if you're in a dense city, right, you can be tapping into a data center that's perhaps near a renewable source of energy, and you can still use that service. So I fundamentally challenge the tenet that this is somehow an environmental disaster. I think it's just the fact that now society is wrangling with very transparent services that are exposing how these systems actually work to the entire population, right? It's not behind a proprietary service like Facebook or Google, where all the operations are behind the scenes and you just use the interface, right? With blockchains, you're really confronted with, this is a public good, this is in the public domain, right? And everyone has access to it at the same level. And that's radically, radically different for society. And I think that's what we're wrangling with. And then I would also say, is the Ethereum community, well before NFT, started bubbling up, we really had a movement to ETH2. And so we're not talking about a technology that is somehow static and not improving. We have a technology that is going to be making leaps and bounds in terms of its efficiency. I'm not aware of any technology that I would be more excited about right now than Ethereum for its ability to evolve at the scale that it's operating on. And I think people really need to reflect on some of these narratives and realize that they're not dealing with a static, siloed entity. They're dealing with a ever-evolving, fast-changing ecosystem. And that's really exciting to me.